So, it was hard for me to like choose who I really wanted to win, but I knew in my heart who I really wanted to win. That was Muhammad Ali.
You might think the strongest opponent Larry Holmes ever faced was Mike Tyson or Muhammad Ali, but you would be wrong. The truth is far more surprising and reveals why Holmes stands as one of the most complete heavyweight champions in boxing history. His list of 5 toughest opponents shows us something remarkable about what it truly means to be a champion. For Holmes, toughness was not just about winning or losing. It was about the different kinds of challenges a fighter could face. Physical challenges that pushed his body to the limit, technical challenges that tested his boxing skills, mental challenges that demanded incredible emotional strength. His 5 toughest opponents represent all of these different types of difficulty, and together they prove why Holmes deserves his place among the all-time greats. Larry Holmes dominated heavyweight boxing from 1978 to 1985. During that time, he defended his title an incredible 20 consecutive times after winning the WBC belt. This was not an easy era for boxing. Holmes had to bridge 2 different generations of fighters. He came after the golden era of Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, and George Foreman. He came before the rise of Mike Tyson. Right in the middle of these 2 legendary periods, Holmes built his own legacy through consistency, skill, and pure toughness. His success came from his ability to adapt. He was known as a master stylist with arguably the finest jab in heavyweight history. But having a great jab was not enough. He had to use it against fighters who brought completely different threats to the ring. The 5 fighters Holmes names as his toughest opponents are Ken Norton, Ernie Shavers, Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, and Joe Frazier. Each one of these legendary boxers tested Holmes in a unique way. Some tested his physical durability, some tested his technical ability to solve problems in the ring, some tested his mind and his heart. By looking at why each fighter was so difficult for Holmes, we can understand what made him such a complete champion. Before we dive deeper into each opponent, make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below, telling us which of these 5 fighters you think gave Holmes the hardest time. Was it the brutal physical war with Norton, the devastating power of Shavers, or the emotional weight of fighting Ali? Let us know what you think. Let's start with the fighter Holmes himself called the toughest of his entire career, Ken Norton. On June 9, 1978, Holmes challenged Norton for the WBC title at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. This was Holmes' first shot at a major title, and the pressure was enormous. Norton had been awarded the title after Leon Spinks was stripped following his rematch with Ali. Norton was actually the betting favorite going into the fight at 6-5 odds. To make matters worse, Holmes entered the ring with a serious problem. He had injured his left bicep during sparring just 5 days before the fight. His left arm was compromised, and he was about to face one of the most physically demanding opponents in the division. The fight itself was a brutal 15-round war. Both men were exhausted, battered, and pushed to their absolute limits. The final round became legendary in boxing history. Both fighters were barely standing, yet they continued to trade furious punches toe-to-toe until the final bell. When the judges gave their scores, the decision could not have been closer. 2 judges scored the fight 143 to 142 for Holmes. The 3rd judge scored it 143 to 142 for Norton. Holmes won by the narrowest possible margin on just 2 scorecards. He won the title by a single point. This razor-thin victory is exactly why Norton stands at the top of Holmes' list. Holmes later said something that proves just how difficult this fight was. He stated that after Norton, his 20 title defenses were playground stuff. Think about that for a moment. Holmes successfully defended his championship 20 times against world-class opponents. Yet he considered all of those defenses easier than the single night he spent in the ring with Ken Norton. Holmes often called this victory his sweetest because it earned him respect and proved his skill was legitimate. The combination of physical pain, technical difficulty, and emotional strain in that one fight set a new standard for what Holmes considered true adversity. What made Norton so dangerous? Norton had an unusual fighting style that gave opponents fits. He used a crab-crouching, cross-armed defense that was hard to penetrate. He was a pressure fighter who kept coming forward, forcing his opponents to fight at close range. This was a problem for Holmes because Holmes preferred to fight from long range using his jab. Norton's style took away Holmes' natural advantages and forced him into uncomfortable situations. Norton was also incredibly strong and hit hard. Holmes acknowledged that Norton was probably the hardest puncher he fought outside of Ernie Shavers. Norton earned nicknames like the Jawbreaker after he fractured Muhammad Ali's jaw in their first bout. He was also called Black Hercules because of his physical strength. Fighting Norton was like trying to box against a relentless, powerful, unorthodox machine for 15 rounds. The fact that Holmes overcame this challenge while dealing with an injured arm validated his abilities as a true champion. Now let's talk about Ernie Shavers, the man who represents pure punching power. Shavers holds a special place on Holmes's list because he was not a technical master. He never won a world title despite 2 attempts. But what Shavers had was the most devastating single-shot knockout power in boxing history. Holmes has said this repeatedly and without any doubt. When asked who hit him the hardest, Holmes said Ernie Shavers, no doubt about it. He could knock the hell out of you. This is a stunning statement because Holmes fought in the toughest heavyweight era and later faced Mike Tyson. Yet he maintains that Shavers hit harder than Tyson, harder than anyone. Other fighters who faced Shavers agreed, including Muhammad Ali and Ron Lyle. Shavers' record backs up this claim. He scored 70 knockouts out of 76 total wins. That is a knockout rate of over 76%. Holmes first fought Shavers in 1978 and won by decision, but the real test came in their 1979 rematch. Shavers had earned another shot by spectacularly knocking out Ken Norton in just 1 round. In the rematch, Holmes was dominating most of the fight. Then came the 7th round. Shavers landed a crushing overhand right that sent Holmes crashing to the canvas. This was one of the rare times Holmes was knocked down during his prime. Holmes described what happened in a way that shows just how powerful the punch was. He said, "Ernie hit me harder than any other fighter, including Mike Tyson. He hit me and I was face down on the canvas hearing saxophonist Jimmy Tillis." Holmes went on to explain that the impact was so severe it momentarily knocked him out. It was the crash to the canvas that actually revived him. What happened next is what makes this moment so important. Most fighters who get hit that hard stay down. Most fighters who lose consciousness, even for a moment, cannot recover. But Holmes got back up. He survived the round. Then he regained control of the fight and went on to stop Shavers in the 11th round. This was not just about having a strong chin. This was about having an incredible survival instinct and exceptional ring intelligence under maximum pressure. Holmes proved that night that he could withstand the most dangerous weapon in boxing and still find a way to win. His resilience was not just physical. It was mental. It was the heart of a true champion who refused to give up even after being hurt in the worst possible way. The third fighter on Holmes's list is Muhammad Ali, but for completely different reasons. The challenge Ali presented was not physical, it was psychological and emotional. Muhammad Ali was Holmes's hero. Holmes had served as Ali's sparring partner for years, learning directly from the master during legendary training camps. This relationship meant that when Holmes faced Ali in 1980, he was not just fighting another opponent. He was fighting the man who had shaped his career. He was fighting his mentor, his idol. The emotional weight of the situation was immense. The fight took place when Ali was 38 years old and clearly past his prime. Ali was in visible physical decline. He had trained obsessively to lose weight, often sacrificing strength and endurance in the process. Holmes, on the other hand, was in his physical prime and technically superior. This created what many people called a no-win situation for Holmes. If he dominated Ali, which he did, critics would say the victory meant nothing, because Ali was just a shell of his former self. If Holmes showed mercy or struggled, his championship would be questioned. Holmes had to navigate an impossible moral dilemma. He had to clinically defeat a man he deeply respected, knowing the public would judge him harshly no matter what happened. Holmes's technical dominance was complete. His superior jab and physical condition overwhelmed the aging legend. Ali's corner surrendered before the start of the 11th round. After the fight, Holmes was seen crying. This emotional reaction reveals the true difficulty of that night. It was not about the boxing. It was about the psychological burden of having to hurt someone he cared about. It was about executing a perfect game plan against the weight of history and legend. The backlash Holmes received afterward, with people viewing him as the man who beat a faded star, created a unique kind of career adversity. By including Ali among his toughest opponents, Holmes asks us to understand that the greatest challenge of that fight was mental, not physical. Overcoming personal attachment and public criticism while maintaining professional excellence is its own kind of toughness. The final 2 fighters on Holmes's list, George Foreman and Joe Frazier, are unique because Holmes never fought them in their primes. Yet he considers them among his toughest opponents because of what they represented. These were theoretical threats that Holmes measured himself against. George Foreman represents the greatest explosive power that Holmes was fortunate never to face at the peak. Foreman in the 1970s was defined by overwhelming destructive force. He famously destroyed Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, stopping both in just 2 rounds. Foreman's size, power, and intimidating presence made him a nightmare matchup for many fighters. Holmes frequently mentioned Foreman when discussing the champions of his era, placing him firmly among the greatest threats. Holmes even issued a friendly challenge to the older Foreman later in their careers, showing that the idea of this matchup held symbolic importance. The challenge Foreman would have presented was clear. Any punch could end the fight. Holmes would have needed to execute a perfect strategy based on his legendary jab, his mobility, and his superior stamina over 15 rounds. But could Holmes have handled Foreman's power? The answer comes from the Ernie Shavers fight. Experts agree that Shavers was actually a harder hitter than Foreman. Since Holmes survived the most devastating blow in boxing history from Shavers and recovered to win, he proved he had the durability to withstand Foreman's signature power. Foreman also had weaknesses. He struggled against fighters who used movement and straight counterpunches, as Muhammad Ali showed. Holmes's precise, fast jab combined with his movement would likely have allowed him to keep Foreman at distance and wear him down over the championship rounds. By including Foreman, Holmes acknowledges the danger while also showing confidence in his proven abilities. Joe Frazier represents a different kind of threat entirely. Frazier's challenge was purely stylistic. Smokin' Joe was a smaller heavyweight at 5 feet 11.5 inches who specialized in relentless pressure fighting, powerful body attacks, and a devastating left hook. Frazier was what boxing people call a swarmer. His goal was to apply non-stop pressure, cut off the ring, and force opponents into close quarters where his strengths dominated. Everything about Frazier's style was designed to take away what made Holmes great. Holmes excelled at fighting from the outside, using his superior reach and jab against taller or slower opponents. Frazier would have immediately neutralized this advantage. Boxing historians regard a prime Frazier as a potential nightmare matchup for Holmes for 3 reasons. First, Frazier's short stature and constant bobbing and weaving would have forced Holmes to punch downward. This would reduce the accuracy of Holmes's jab, taking away his most reliable weapon. Second, Frazier's unrelenting pressure and ring-cutting ability would deny Holmes the lateral movement he needed to reset. Holmes would be constantly on his back foot. Third, Frazier would force the fight inside, requiring Holmes to clinch, move, or trade punches in areas where he was less comfortable. Holmes never faced an opponent with this exact combination of non-stop aggression, exceptional body punching, and the ability to maintain that pace for 15 rounds. Frazier's inclusion on this list is an intellectual choice by Holmes. It shows he recognized that technical vulnerability and strategic incompatibility can be just as tough as raw power. These 5 opponents define what made Larry Holmes a complete champion. Ken Norton proved Holmes had the heart and physical will to survive a 15-round war against an unconventional, relentless opponent while injured. Ernie Shavers proved Holmes had extraordinary resilience and could recover from the most devastating punch in boxing history. Muhammad Ali proved Holmes had the mental discipline to overcome emotional burden and public controversy while executing a clinical strategy. George Foreman and Joe Frazier proved Holmes understood the peak threats of his era and measured his abilities against the most dangerous theoretical matchups. Together, these 5 fighters show that Holmes was not just a great boxer, he was an adaptable survivor who faced different kinds of crises and found ways to overcome them all. His 20 consecutive title defenses were not easy. They were the result of a champion who had already been tested by the absolute best and learned from each unique challenge. That is why Larry Holmes deserves recognition as one of the most complete heavyweights in boxing history. His list of toughest opponents is not about who beat him or who he struggled against. It is about understanding what true difficulty means in the ring. If you enjoyed learning about Holmes' incredible career and the legendary fighters who tested him, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more boxing history content. Drop a comment and tell us who you think would win if Prime Holmes faced Prime Frazier or Prime Foreman. We would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.